The land of the continent is an ancient, mysterious place with many years of history. Wars have happened year after year as many political parties, kingdoms, and races fight over land and resources. And on top of that, monsters also roam this land, hunting down food sources and killing for fun because of the mysterious Big Bang events known as the conjunction of the spheres. After this cataclysmic event, this land was now filled with different races and creatures all trying to work out where they were and how they were going to survive. This would at first seem fine as many of the races would come together to fight their common foe of the many different monsters. However, after a while tension got heated and events would take place separating one race from another. Pogroms would start in the cities and towns, and eventually humans would become the overall rulers of the land. But before all of that, one race built up the continent. They forged the great cities of the land, set up their own unique cultures, and lived off the precious resources, respecting everything around them. These people would be known as one of the elder races. This race was known as the Elves, including the Aen Seidhe and the Aen Elle, who inhabited a different planet. But as the continent went into the latter half of the 13th century, the elves who once ruled these lands are now hated by many of the other races, but more specifically by humans who taunt their existence and look to chase them out of their homes and the land if they so much as reveal their pointed ears. So what is the story of the elves? What are their differences between the Aen Seidhe and the Aen Elle? Why are they hated by the humans of the continent, and how have the elves hit back over the years? Well, in today's video we will be exploring this ancient race, how they run their societies and honor their traditions, look at the wars they were involved in, and dive into their real history as opposed to the latest tragedy that was Netflix's Blood Origin that was to supposedly tell the story everyone had forgotten. And honestly, you should forget it because it's not lore accurate at all. But ignoring that, this is the story behind one of the most hated races within the Witcher series. This is the tale of the elder race, known simply as the Elves. Our story of the elves and also the continent begins around 2,500 years before the conjunction of the spheres took place. During this time, a white ship traveled over the vast ocean transporting the elves onto the land. These elves would be seen as the Aen Seidhe, which in the elder speech would translate to people of the hills or the hill folk. This event in the elves' history would be known as the Age of Migration, where the once group of Aen elves saw their world get destroyed and split up by a cataclysm that came out of nowhere and forced them into finding a new place to live. A decision was made during this time where the Aen would split into two distinct cultural groups. These would be the previously mentioned Aen Seidhe, who would go on to venture on their white ships and arrive on the Pontar and Yaruga shores of the continent, and the Aen Elle, who would travel through their own portals into other worlds out there and come into contact with a new sentient species who were able to travel naturally between worlds and time. These being the unicorns, who would help the Aen Elle to found the city of Aen Elle. For a time, the Aen Seidhe were one of the oldest species to live on the continent, only being outlived by the gnomes who inhabited the lands before they got there. But now finding this land, it didn't take long before the elven people started forging magnificent civilizations that were grand in stature and extremely pleasing to the eye, with a lot of their locations being now where big human cities now lay, such as Oxenfurt and Vizima. These structures were said to be great cities and palaces that were made out of stone. However, the elves were particular about what they made, as castles and fortresses were never founded in their time on this land. As the years went past, the elves went into their full colonization phase and took over most of the areas of the continent. However, this was not done through brutal means. In fact, most of the time it was done through peaceful negotiations. But that is not to say it always worked out, as the race did find themselves in clashes with several different races, such as the dwarves, the lizard people known as the Varans, and the Werrebubs, as they would go on to take control of the Varani city of Loch Moine. During these 1,000 years, the elves would set up their culture and ways of living that would be unique to their specific race. For example, the Aen Seidhe had a heavy emphasis on naturalism and living in harmony with the land, instead of trying to get it to bend to one's will. Those elves that live within the cities, however, would take up more scholarly or artistic roles, allowing them to be extremely educated and take up a variety of professions professions. Those out within the more rural lands take to the more simpler way of living. They would go on to hunt and gather food and resources for their families, but honouring the land around them when they do so, only taking some fruit from areas to allow the bushes, plants and trees to keep growing and sustaining the ecosystem around them. When it came to the small conflicts the elves found themselves in with the dwarves and lizard people, for example, elven warriors would always be known to favour bows with metal swords and would always favour armour that was made out of furs and hides that they had gathered from their hunts, once again making sure they used what the world had provided them naturally. The elven bows are very different to any out there, however, as they are renowned for their light weight and ease of use, with even human hunters later in life preferring to use them as they made hunting much easier, especially if they are tracking for long periods of time. One bow, for example, known as the Zephyr, is short in arc length and formed from a composite of wood and animal sinew. One human hunter named Milva stated that the Zephyrs were indeed lighter than human yew bows. However, this did not limit them, as they were able to launch an arrow at higher velocity and with a reduced spread of accuracy, making them a near perfect bow to use. Even the arrows made by the elves are said to be brilliant, as they are often fledged with grey feathers and the shaft fluted for increased stiffness and weight reduction, enabling the elven archers to have almost silent shots, perfect for when hunting timid creatures and also to stealthily take out their enemies, with the arrow tips consisting of three-edged razor-sharp blades that bored in like a screw, which would create major internal damage to anyone who were to be shot with one of these perfectly crafted pieces of weaponry. When it comes to their native tongue, most elves will always speak their Elder speech, which would be the traditional language of the Aen Seidhe. However, that is not to say that in later years, when they met with other races such as the humans, they cannot speak to them, as the elves are fluent in speaking the common speech, especially those within the main cities who can sometimes speak the common tongue better than the humans themselves. Religion is a real hush-hush subject for the elves, with not many people knowing what they truly worship when at home or together in a group. However, it is said that before they met with the humans, the elves once worshipped a deity which would be similar to Meletili, a mother goddess who was patron for love, marriage, peace, fertility, nature, abundance, and motherhood, which once again ties into the Aen Seidhe's way of life, honouring the land around them, leading many to believe that their deity was one that was patron to harvest and fertility. Some say this deity would be named as Dana Maeve, who would also be known as the Eternal One, Queen of the Fields, Lifia, and Blomimagda by the dwarves. However, as mentioned, not many people know what the elves truly believe in, because they do not talk about it in the presence of humans, believing that humans are barbarians who could not grasp its philosophical and mystical subtleties. As a race, they also believe that the elves were created by a deity and placed within the universe, but other races have just evolved into what they are today, making them lesser beings and not worthy of the luxuries of what the universe gives them. For the humans though, they honestly couldn't care less about what the elves believe, as it does not affect their lives in the slightest. For 1,000 years, these traditions and ways of life continued on, with most of the elves living quite a long time due to their long lifespan. The cultural difference began shaping the two elven societies of the Aen Seidhe and the Aen Elle as well, which would allow many people to spot the difference between the two types of elves. The Aen Elle, for example, would be most of the time taller in stature than the Aen Seidhe, with a darker, more grey-like complexion to their skin, and on top of that, the Aen Elle would look more into bending the world around them into what they want it to do, exploring more magic and sorcery, and enslaving other creatures rather than using the natural resources around them, which is what the Aen Seidhe would do. These cultural shifts would make it so that despite once being connected as a race, the two are now very distant, both in their own parts of the universe, forging their own cultures and ultimately their destinies. However, the time had now come for the conjunction to begin, and as it all started due to unexplainable circumstances, the multiverse all aligned as unnatural creatures such as ghouls, graviers, and vampires were sent into the different worlds, which included the continent. But on top of that, other races started to venture all over the different worlds. It was here a few months after the event where the first humans started traveling to the northern kingdoms of the continent in the event that would be labeled as the First Landing, or Landing of the Exiles. Here, the first 4 ships carrying men, with one being labelled as the Ship of Outcasts, would land on the Ponta Delta, as well as the mouth of the Yaruga around the year of 760. Where these exiles came from was relatively unknown, but what was known was that these men that arrived were determined, aggressive, and intolerant people by nature, and were looking for new land to set up their world. One individual who was on the Ship of Outcasts named Jan Becker discovered this new power that emerged on the land ever since the conjunction happened, that being chaos, simply known to many as magic. And when discovering this powerful force, Jan and his fellow men were able to use it as a powerful weapon in their battles that were to be coming very soon. As the first humans started to enter the elven parts of the continent, they would begin taking over land at a rapid pace, similar to what the elves had done many years before. For the elves, however, they would mistake the humans' intentions for taking land, and for a good while would underestimate the threat of the human colonization. As the humans got more aggressive with their taking of the land, the elven people refused to take action against them, as many of them did not want to start a human-elven war, knowing full well that a war would only bring about thousands of casualties involving many innocents along the way. Instead, the elves retreated and gave up their own land for the humans, moving further into the eastern part of the continent, hoping that maybe, just maybe, these new invaders would one day stop expanding and just be content with the land they had acquired through pretty harsh means. In the process, many of the luxurious elven cities were abandoned by the elves, as the humans would continue on moving more and more into the rest of the continent. But the elves had had enough. They needed some assurance that the humans were not going to expand even more and basically wipe out all of the elven places. Here, the human known as Jeffrey Monk, a powerful mage and member of the Novigradian Union, signed a peace treaty with the elves to make sure both did not enter a violent, bloody war that would see countless deaths. However, this was very quickly broken by the Redanian leader Milan Ropanek, as he led his Royal Redanian army north of the Pontar River towards the elven city of Loch Moyne, and would go on to slaughter all of the elven residents regardless of their age and gender. Following that, they did not stop there, as they would then go towards Est Hamlet, an elven town, and slaughtered the people living there as well. This brutal attack on the elven people was completely unprovoked and showed the true brutality of the humans, who cared little for those that had lived there before. Because of this bloody slaughter, the elves had to fight back, as they gathered their full forces and announced war on the humans. But sadly, this war was like the peace treaty in the sense that it did not last long at all. The humans were too powerful, with overwhelming forces compared to what the elves had had, and because of it, the elves kept being pushed back more and more into the east, eventually leading to their overall surrender. But some elves did not want to hold back, and in the year of 1060, a young elf named Aliren led a group of elves that were tired of hiding away within the mountains in the east, and went on a battle path towards the ancient elven palace of Sherawed, going against her elders' orders. But like all of the events of the human-elven war, this was short-lived as well, as the humans stationed there killed them all within seconds, making sure once again the elves could not regain any territory for themselves. Aliren did, however, go on to inspire the rest of the elves within the mountain regions because of her bravery and attempt to hit back against their new brutal rulers who had taken the land by force. The end of this war massively affected all of the elves. Their numbers were incredibly low now due to how many were lost in battle, and their cities and towns that they had lived within were now under the rule of humans. One of their main reasons for why the elves were so hindered in their war was because their birth rate was so incredibly low. This is all because the elves have their long lifespan, so their reproduction rate is much lower than that of humans, meaning the elves couldn't bring in the younger generations to fight in their battles as much as the humans could. Now, with the elves out of the picture, humans could rule the continent for themselves, destroying everything the elves once built up in terms of their rich culture, artwork, and lands. During the conflicts, however, the elves would always destroy their own cities and towns to make sure the humans could not make the most of their luxury structures, leaving them with just rubble. But with the elves out of the way, humanity would go on to build their own cities on top of what the elves had once had. had, with some of the most recognizable cities of Novigrad, Oxenfurt, Vizima, Tretogor, Maribor, Sidaris, and the city of Sintra being some of the ones that were built on the grounds of destroyed elven cities. For a time, a lot of elves tried to get on with their lives, with some actually intermingling with some of the humans of the towns and cities. This would actually work for a good while, as they would integrate in human society, with some new sub-races being born because of it, with half-elves and quarter-elves being made through a human and elf within a relationship. However, despite these positive changes, elves were still being subjected to a lot of day-to-day prejudices, which would include half and quarter elves as well, simply due to their ears or even linked to the elven bloodline. For the rest who didn't want to intermingle with the humans, they would continue living out within the wilds as secluded clans, living like they once did by honoring the land around them, hunting, fishing, tending to their families, and most importantly, avoiding all contact with humans as much as possible. This new way of life continued on for almost 200 years, but that was all to change once again within 1263, where the First Northern War had just come to an end. Within this war, the mighty army of Nilfgaard led by Menno Cohorn crossed the Aen Elle Mountains under the orders of Emperor Emhyr van Emrys. His goal was simple, and that was to take over all of the northern realms, and immediately would launch a full-scale invasion, hitting the first at the Battle of Marnadal, in which the Nilfgaards would face the Cintran army at the mountain pass. The battle was hard fought, but once again the Nilfgaards overwhelmed the Cintran forces and killed their king, Aesthersig, losing them the battle. With this defeat, the Nilfgaard army were about to take the whole of Cintra and slaughter the population within them, forcing Queen Calanthe to commit suicide as she did not want to be taken prisoner by the Nilfgaardians. The battle continued into Sodden Hill, where they would go on to face the armies of the Redanians, Aedirn and Caedwyn, in what was now the Battle of Sodden Hill. This battle was horrific for many, as over 30,000 were killed in the process out of 100,000 soldiers. But luckily for the Northern Realms, they were able to hit back against Nilfgaard with the help of 13 mages, including one Yennefer of Vengerberg, and in the end won the battle, forcing Nilfgaard to retreat back down south. During the start of this war, however, a group of Aen Seidhe wanted to get a piece of the pie, and along with some of the other non-humans such as the dwarves, would form together into the faction known as the Scoia'tael, also known as Squirrel in Elvish, and would actively use guerrilla warfare on the Northern Realms army, attacking trade caravans as well as individual regiments. The main aim here was that the Scoia'tael had hoped that Nilfgaard would be successful in their invasion of the north, and when they did win the war, elven rule might finally be reinstated in the region, as all of the humans would be killed in the process. This continued for years as the Scoia'tael would actively try and forcibly push the humans out of the area, and with it, they came up with their own unique battle cry that they would use in their attacks. This would be pushing the humans to the sea. In 1266, one of the biggest Scoia'tael attacks was documented taking place within the fort of Caedwyn, in which they would take out many human soldiers in a brutal battle. Soon after this, however, the faction would be tipped off by a group of Caedwanian soldiers to Yarpen Zigrin's company that was leading a special convoy through the woods. Here the Scoia'tael set up an ambush at the old elven palace of Sherewed and attacked the company, as well as the witcher Geralt, his young ward Ciri, and sorceress Triss Merigold, who were travelling with them at the time. The Scoia'tael were successful in killing the dwarves Wilfrid Vennek, Pauli Dalberg, and Yannick Brass, but before they could take any more lives, they would be ambushed themselves by the Caedwani Light Cavalry Brigade, known as the Dun Banner, who would go on to slaughter all of the elves of the Scoia'tael regiment. This triggered further events to hit back against the Scoia'tael, as Demavend III of Aedirn set up a specific group called the Aedirnian Special Forces to repel all Scoia'tael forces within the area. Things progressed even further the following year as the King of Temeria and Prince of Sodden Foltest, along with Demavend and King of Caedwyn Henselt, spent their whole year focusing all of their efforts on taking out the Scoia'tael, and because of it, these kings were successful at reducing their numbers and forced them to retreat even further into the forests. Those that were captured were tortured in town squares, and their corpses were left to rot on roadside posts, being pecked to pieces by the crows and ravens to make sure the message was received loud and clear that the Scoia'tael were to be killed due to their crimes within the region. But with Nilfgaard desperate to try and find a way into the Northern Realms and to take them by force, they would form a somewhat alliance with the Scoia'tael, with Emperor Emhyr van Emrys Emrys, using them all as a diversion force to enable his main Nilfgaard forces to take strongholds that were distracted by the rebel elves and non-humans. Manipulating the Scoia'tael, Emre would promise them their own land in exchange for their loyalty, which would somehow boost the morale of the Scoia'tael and allow their commanders to blindly throw their forces into battles simply due to how blind they were and how manipulative Nilfgaard really were. This did pay off for the elves, however, as Emre did gift them the Valley of Flowers, also known as Dol Blathanna, thanks to the elf Francesca Finderbear and her success within the operation known as the Thanid Coup, in which mages from the Academy of Aretuza on the Thanid Islands would fight amongst themselves, with one secretly supporting Nilfgaardian ambitions and the other side supporting the north. Thanks to Francesca's help, the Nilfgaard supporters were victorious, and as a result, Dol Blathanna was theirs, and Francesca was their glamorous queen of the free elves. But like all things within elven history, this was once again extremely short-lived due to the further events of the Second Northern Wars. In March 1268, the most significant battle of the whole war took place within Brenna. Here Nilfgaard sent some of the most advanced, well-equipped troops into the fishing village near Maribor, looking to take it for themselves once again. However, the northern troops stood firm, with all of the kings sending as many troops as they could muster. The battle was long and bloody, with over 30,000 troops lost, but in the end, the north were once again successful, and Nilfgaard had suffered a devastating loss as their armies had been completely surrounded by the Nordling armies. This huge defeat for Nilfgaard triggered peace talks between the northern realms, the Nilfgaard Empire, as well as the Lodge of Sorceresses, which would be labelled as the Peace of Sintra. And with these talks underway, the Second Northern Nilfgaard War had come to an end. But with the talks underway, Edirne's king, Demavend III, acknowledged the new land of Dol Blathanna that was ruled by the elven queen, Francesca, but here as a duchy rather than the full kingdom. And with it also requested that it be a place that offered equal rights to both humans and elves, whilst also paying him liege homage. Francesca accepted all of the terms offered except one, this being paying him homage. Instead, it would just be a freehold, and that she would just give an oath of loyalty to him. This would completely limit her title to only Duchess later in life, but still gave her great power within this area. On top of this, however, her new title forced her to distance herself from her once followers of the Scoia'tael and speak out against their guerrilla war waging ways. Without their queen, the Scoia'tael would not have such a great figure to look up to anymore. However, that did not stop their war efforts, as they would still be quoted as being a great thorn in the side of neighbouring realms. To this day in 1272, some of the Aen Seidhe still live amongst the humans of the north, with many members still being a part of the Scoia'tael, looking at any opportunity they can to wipe out convoys, hinder the northern armies, and even turning their backs on Nilfgaard after the events of the peace agreement at the end of the Second Northern War. Maybe one day the continent will see peace between all parties and factions, including the North and Nilfgaard. However, as the author of the book labelled The Aftermath of the War said within it, the wars between humans and non-humans will never cease because there is too much hostility between the races. In his opinion, the elves are doomed to extinction. As for the Aen Elle, their fate would be a bit different on their other planet. Seeing their fate be shifted due to the powerful unicorns refusing to help them use the gate to the other worlds due to their overall treatment, they would create powerful mages known as navigators to help them send small groups of riders into other realms to capture slaves for their homeworld and resources as well. Early in their time, these Red Riders led by Eredin would target humanity after wiping them out originally on their own planet, and travel to where the Aen Seidhe were located on the continent and raid human villages, killing those humans that weren't fit or capable of being useful to them and enslaving those who were healthy enough to work. This happened for years on end, with people from Skellige stating they would see the demonic ship of the Naglfar, as well as many riders come to their land, labeling them as the Wraiths of Morholt, Warthog, and that they would return only when it was the end of the world, also known as Ragnarok. Eventually this group would turn into what was known as the Wild Hunt, and would continue on their multi-planet conquest to enslave all humans they would see as being lesser, more primitive beings, as well as finding out that out there within the multiverse, there was one person who had the power of the unicorns running in their blood. This person could be the answer to all of their problems, could open portals to other worlds and allow them to escape their homeland that was quickly becoming uninhabitable by the White Frost. This individual would be Ciri, who contained the elder blood in her veins, and if the Wild Hunt were to capture her, they could have children with her, allowing all of the Aen Elle to become the chosen race that could take over and inhabit any planet they wish. Now under the rule of Eredin, their once Red Rider commander, this was their primary goal now, to seek out Ciri and forcibly take the elder blood from her so they could use it to further their race. But seeing as I have covered the whole backstory of the Wild Hunt, this was just a really loose summary of what had happened with them. And if you want a full look at their lore, do check out my video, which I will link down below and also on the pop-up on the top right of your screen around about now. But for now, this has been the story behind the Elves of the Witcher series, some of the most noble individuals who have been pushed down by humanity. For the Aen Elle, they have taken out all of the humans on their home planet and used them as slaves, believing them to still be barbarians that aren't worthy of their time and resources. But for the Aen Seidhe, they have been oppressed by humans who invaded their world and took it by force. Now being pushed away, they have taken the brutal way of life into their own hands and will do anything to take their land back, forming into a new faction of the Scoia'tael. As mentioned before, it does appear that the elves are doomed to a horrible fate. However, maybe, just maybe, there will be peace amongst all of the races of the continent. And now with the Wild Hunt being wiped out by Geralt and his companions, maybe there is no better time to unite as a region and all come together as a united continent. With all of that said, this is the lore behind the elder race of the continent, known as the Aen Seidhe, as well as the Aen Elle, more collectively known as the Elves. I want to say a huge thank you for watching this video and a massive thank you to my patrons for allowing me to make them on a regular basis, including my small fishes, my big fishes, Christopher, Last Persona User and Arto Creme, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Fiery Italian, Ico the Wolf and Sith Lord 906, my sharks Wow Such Gaming, Jason X117 and Breadbeard, and my Megalodons, Sinus, Cody, Hazy Thoughts and Chernobyl Stalker. But that is all for now. Thank you for watching again, and if you want more Witcher lore, check out my playlist below. And please do like, comment and subscribe to help get these videos out there. And with all that said, I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.